Thank you for tuning into Literary Blend, a publishing podcast. I'm your host, Demi Michelle Schwartz. There's no perfect recipe for chasing a dream in the publishing industry, but I hope the conversations on this show give you the ingredients you need to bake yours into reality. So let's flip the page and get into this chapter of Literary Blend. Hello, friends. Thank you so much for tuning into Literary Blend. Today's chapter is a glimpse into revision, and joining me on the show to have a chat about this topic is one of my author besties. Please give a virtual warm welcome to Jess Minneci. Hey, Jess.
Hey, how's it going, Demi? I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm doing fantastic, and I hope you are too. Well, I'm so excited to have you on the show today. We're going to be chatting all things revision. But before we dive into our chat about this, can you please share a little about yourself and your author adventure so far?
Sure. So, like Demi said, my name is Jessica Minneci. I am a graduate student at Seton Hill University. So, I'll be graduating this summer with my master's in fine arts in writing popular fiction. So, as part of the program, we actually write our own market-ready manuscript, our own novel in a chosen genre. So my chosen genre is young adult fantasy, and I have composed my book, and I've actually passed my thesis, so I'm really excited about that. Demi and I will be talking about revision, which is what I've been doing for the last year with my book. This is my first novel. I'm really excited about it. It's very close to my heart, and I hope someday I can find an agent and get published. So that's me. Demi and I also have been friends since we were in undergrad. So we've been friends for I think 6 years now. Can't believe it. Time flies by. So I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you like to share a little about your book? Give the listeners a glimpse into what it's all about?
Sure. So my book is a young adult contemporary fantasy novel about dragons and angels. It follows our main protagonist, Luella, as she discovers she's a draken, which is a hellish creature that's bent on destroying the world. And so the novel explores her transformation. It has themes of good and evil and a quest for her to restore the feather of truth to the scales in the Hall of Judgment, which will allow souls to pass through the Duat and either go to the Fields of Peace or the Pits of Hell. It's a very involved story with themes of friendship, self-discovery. There's also a love story in there, and it's just a fun time. It's kind of reminiscent of Percy Jackson in a sense that there's a quest all throughout the U.S., but it's also more adult than a Percy Jackson, I would say, and it has elements of Egyptian mythology.
Yes, love Egyptian mythology. Awesome. Perfect. Well, I cannot wait to see what you do next with that book, and keeping my fingers crossed for you to find an agent one day for it. But now let's shift gears and chat about revision. So this is a very, very important part of the writing process. So just from your point of view, why do you think revision is so essential?
I think revision is essential because you want to make sure that your book makes sense to begin with. So a lot of people are what we call pantsers, who just write off the seat of their pants. They have no outline, nothing. And I pantsed my first draft. So it was a mess. And any pantser will tell you that you need to revise your first draft because it's a mess. Even if you plot it, there's obviously going to be plot holes that you end up creating that you don't realize you have in there even just grammar errors to scenes that don't need to be in there. Some people write really long first drafts and have to cut a bunch of stuff. Some people write first drafts that are like a skeleton of what they want the book to be like. Maybe their first draft doesn't have a lot of sensory imagery, or they just focus on dialogue and not setting, or they focus on the setting and maybe something doesn't happen. I had a really good friend who wrote beautiful scenes, and then I'm like, wait, what just happened? Did the characters move through through where they're going to? And so you really have to revise because you want your novel to be as perfect as it can be, and you want it to, like I said, you want it to make sense. You want it to be readable, and you also want to revise it to the point where you don't readers will grab it and not want to put it down.
Yes, absolutely. I love all of that so much. And I think the big thing is that whether or not you're a pantser or a plotter, When you're drafting, there is a big discovery aspect to it. Like, you're a pantser, but I'm a plotter, and even though I have chapter by chapter outlines, once I start drafting, the characters are surprising me, the story is surprising me. I'm going down roads I never thought I would when I was drafting and plotting. So, whenever you're in that space of discovery, you're going to have to go back and do multiple passes to really bring the heart of your story to the forefront. I know for me personally, I don't fully know my characters until I reach the end of my draft. And so revision is a big part for me to go back through and do a lot of character development because I understand them better. I understand their decision making processes, their personalities, and all of that. And the other thing, too, that you mentioned is focusing on different things while you're drafting and revising. It's impossible to really focus on everything, the dialogue, the setting, the internal thoughts, everything. There's so much going on. And so recognizing yourself as an author and what you tend to focus on during drafting, like if you really focus on the plot and the setting, well, then maybe when you're revising, you can focus more on realistic dialogue and characterization. So you always have the opportunity to go back and fix it, which is something I really need to get into my head because Jess knows I am a perfectionist when I'm drafting. And so I really need to remind myself, like, okay, if this chapter feels too long or it feels like it needs more or something needs to happen or nothing's really tension going on, I can go back and fix that. So revision is a great freedom point too, because you know you can always go back and fix things and improve things. You're not locked into your first draft.
Yeah, and what's really important too is there are some friends of mine that say that revision is their favorite part of the writing process because they really get to create a novel out of, as the director of our program would say, a pile of crap. She's like, the first draft is crap. Don't worry about it. That's what she always would say. Because when you revise it, you really get to create something out of what you have. So picture your first draft as like a big mound of clay that has some semblance of a shape, and then your like revised draft would be a finished sculpture. That's kind of how I picture it. So, you really have to focus on that. And especially revising for your first book. Like, this is my first book I've ever written. So, like, I'm not going to be perfect. No author is perfect in their first draft. Like, that's why they have editors. They have, copy editors, developmental editors. Like, they have all of that because they want to make sure that their book will sell, but they also want to make sure it's readable. One of the best advice that I ever got was to revise your novel, but then like take a break from it and then come back and then read it as a reader. And then if you don't like it as a reader, then you know what, like, where you want to fix stuff. So it's really important. And like Demi was saying with the self-discovery of the characters, I wasn't like best friends with my protagonist until I really discovered her goal, motivation, and conflict. And that's something that I thought I included in my outline when I originally had to turn an outline. And I did, but I wasn't in her head. I wasn't friends with her. I didn't feel like I was writing her. You know what I mean? Until later on, I felt like I knew my side characters really well. But my protagonist, I learned as a writer, my first draft, like, it takes a long time to get to know them sometimes. Like, sometimes they don't like you and you don't like them until later on.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that 100%. And I'm really, really happy you brought up the point of taking a break from it, going back and reading it, because that was exactly the point I was going to bring up. I think whenever you finish a draft, authors can be really excited, like, oh, I'm going to dive in, I'm going to start revising. But I think it is really important to take a break from it before you start revising and before you send it out for feedback, which we're going to talk about next in a couple minutes here. Whenever you take a step back and you view it with fresh eyes, you're going to see things yourself that need revise and fix before you get feedback, because whenever you send your work out for critiques, I think it's really important to give the other readers who are reading your book the best version possible so they can help you take what you created and make it even better. So separating yourself from the story is really important. And also, to once you go back to look at it again after you took a break from it, then you can do some editing on your own and cut the scenes that you feel aren't necessary and do the grammar checks and all of that. So Jess and I learned a technique when we were in school, which is reverse outlining, which is something I know you really like to do with yours. So can you give the listeners a little overview of what exactly reverse outline is as a tool if they aren't familiar with it?
I write the chapters like by number, so like 1 through whatever. And so, like, let's say there's 1 through 30. I go down to the bottom of my manuscript and I read chapter 30, and then I write maybe 2 sentences or 2 bullets about what happened in chapter 30. And then I go back and I read chapter 29 and I do the same thing. You're basically outlining backwards. So you're reading the last chapter, writing what happens, the penultimate chapter, writing what happens, and you go all the way up to the first chapter. The reason why I really like doing this is because you actually know more about your like last chapter, because that's what you just wrote. You know, if you just finished writing your book, you really know what happens last. And so you're kind of like refamiliarizing yourself with the plot. And as you go backwards, you kind of think mostly about like, okay, why did this happen in this order? And then what you can do later is you can read the outline from the beginning to the end, and you can rearrange scenes, or you can like delete scenes. It really helps you focus yourself on what's going on in the book and what you can keep and what you can change and what you can delete.
Yeah, no, fantastic. I think this is great too because essentially what this is doing is making you familiarize yourself with what you actually wrote. When you read start to finish, you wrote it. So in your brain, you kind of have this understanding of what you did. But by forcing yourself to read it backwards and taking the notes on each chapter and seeing it that way, you're really understanding what exactly you wrote so that you can take a better approach when you're getting into revisions. For me personally, I really like to edit my book and leave like critiques as if I'm editing somebody else's book. So I will like read it and I will leave line edits for myself. And so I'll go through and do that and then also keep another running document of things that I want to change along the way. And then I go back and do the revision. So now let's shift gears and talk about feedback. So once we have a polished enough story where it's more streamlined. We did some tweaking, some grammar checks. We fixed major plot holes that we saw on our own, things like that. Then it's really important to get feedback for many reasons, but just for you, why do you think feedback is such a big part of the writing process?
I think, like we mentioned before, we sometimes don't see what's wrong with our work because we've been looking at our work for so long. So, like we mentioned before about stepping away, that helps us a little bit, but feedback helps us immensely because, like in school, for example, Demi and I were in the same critique group. And at the time, she was writing her thriller, and I was writing my fantasy novel. So it was really cool getting feedback from someone from a different genre, because with a thriller, you're working on suspense and like fast pacing. So when she's reading my fantasy novel, she's like, okay, this needs to go faster. You need to get here faster. So like having feedback from someone of a different genre gives you a new, fresh perspective. And the same thing goes with feedback from people in your genre, because they can send you feedback like, okay, this magic system is like way overdone. You need to change it and make it original, you know? Or I've seen this creature before, and I've seen books where creatures transform before. So like, here's how you can like beef up your transformation. So like having feedback really helps you focus your book and cater it to your reader, really, because you as the writer are not your intended reader. You know, you're writing for an audience of readers. And so if someone reads your book and they're like, yeah, I don't like this, I don't like this, I don't like this, then you can fix it and make it better and cater it toward your reader. And so what's really great too is having beta readers later on who can read it and tell you, you know, they do or do not like it. Beta readers being like people like I'm writing young adults, so like young adults reading it, who read fantasy, you know, so like you're really catering to your reader, because at the end of the day, your book is selling to an audience, and if your audience doesn't like it, or then you're not going to be able to get it to an agent, to get it to an editor, to publish it. It's just going to sit on your shelf. So that's why I think feedback is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on there too the different ways you can get feedback. They can be other authors, like in a critique group, beta readers. You can hire professional editors. There's so many avenues you can go down to get feedback, but it truly is important because you need to understand how somebody else is receiving your book and understanding how multiple people are seeing your book, because when you get your feedback, say you send it to 3 people and they all say the exact same thing, then that's something that you should probably take a look at. But on the other hand, if there's 3 people saying 3 different things, then what that can tell you is, okay, this is a part of the book that's a little more personal preference, subjective in a way. And so you can make the call as the author, okay, I got this feedback. What makes the most sense for my story? So I think when we receive feedback, we really need to remember that at the end of the day, it's our choice as the author what we want to do. But when you have multiple people telling you the same thing, maybe that's something to look at. If it's a little varied feedback, then maybe that's not as big of a deal, but you can still make a decision from that what you want to do. Also, I think it's really important to get feedback because critique partners, beta readers, people like that can give you fantastic ideas. I can't tell you how many times I've had my book critiqued where someone said, oh, it'd be really cool if you had a scene where the character did this, or I was really curious about this. Maybe you can explain that more. And so you get other people's opinions on things you can do to your book and sparking ideas for you of how you can add more layers to your book and make it more interesting and a more attention grabbing in places and just more things to the story that you never thought of by yourself. So there are many different ways that we can utilize feedback and why it's so important. But the other thing too, Jess, I want to talk about is when we get feedback, especially for full manuscripts, for novels. For short stories, it's not as overwhelming because they're shorter, but when you get feedback for a whole book, it can be very overwhelming to absorb all that and come up with a plan of attack for when you start to revise it. So for you, what are some pieces of advice you have for someone who may have gotten their first big edit and they don't know how to approach that?
In the Seton Hill program, what we have is we have a group of 3 usually. So me and 2 other partners, and then we also have a mentor who's a published author who gives us feedback. So in every instance, whenever we would turn in our pages for our books, we'd get 3 sets of comments. And so once your whole manuscript is done and you look at it, what I did is I go chapter by chapter. So like Demi was saying with hers, she comments on her book herself, and then she also has a running list. I myself have a running list of stuff that I want fixed. So when I go to each chapter and I look at comments from 3 people, like Demi was saying, you can pick what you want to change. So like let's say someone just doesn't like the wording in this sentence, you can change it or you can keep it. So what I do is I pick the comments that I want to use, and then I put that in the document with my list of stuff per chapter. When I revised, I would go through it again after I go through the chapter edits, and I look at it as a whole again and be like, okay, this works, this doesn't work. And also what I find too when you revise after the feedback is you notice the plot holes that are there too. Like maybe a reader didn't notice something and you notice something later and you're like, okay, there's a plot hole here that no one picked up on, or there's a plot hole here that only I see but I need fixed. So I'm going to do that. So having that document with a list is crucial because for me, it's a pain in the butt to like open a chapter document and go through like 3 other documents with comments and like revise. Like having that list is so much easier because now you just have your own document open and you're just revising that chapter. So that's what I do. And I find it really helpful because once you have a list, it's not as overwhelming. Like if I didn't have a list and I was just, like I said, moving from document to document, I get overwhelmed really quickly, tire myself out and be like, this is crap, like I don't want to fix it, because sometimes you look in a document, like especially a chapter, you look in a document with like 10 pages of your chapter and you go, there are 20 comments from this person, there's 20 comments from this person, and if you go back and forth like that, you're going to tire yourself out quickly. I want to like say, Demi mentioned passes earlier, so you don't revise all in one pass. Like there are multiple passes that I would do for my book. So before I would get feedback, I'd revise for the plot. Then I'd go through and be like, okay, is the setting good? Is the dialogue good? So like I do multiple passes for mine. Like I fix all of the holes, all the plot holes, because it's the most important first, and then I go through multiple passes. And so then when I get feedback, I'm like, okay, let's go through a pass for plot again. Let's go through a pass through for setting again. And so you kind of do those passes, and it gets tiring. So like what I always tell people with the revision is like, if you don't take multiple breaks, you're going to burn out. Like
Yeah.
like you need to burn out. So maybe like doing a chapter a day when you revise and a chapter a day when you get feedback, or even spreading it out depending on how long, like let's, I have never been published. So I don't know how deadlines work for that, but I'm guessing it's the same. You manage your time so that you have it done by your set deadline. And that's kind of how I do it. And I think it's more organized because I think if you look at a chapter and you go, okay, I gotta edit all of these things. If you look at a chapter and you go, oh, I just gotta edit this plot stuff and then move on and then come back later, it's less overwhelming.
It's really overwhelming if you look at the big picture, but if you take it in smaller chunks, it's more manageable. But the big thing that I try to do, especially when I get feedback, is work from large scale to small scale. And the reason is if you need to do developmental editing, which means like big edits, like plot stuff, cutting scenes, moving things around, adding scenes, that kind of thing, you're going to want to get that straightened out first, because the last thing that anybody wants to do is spend hours line editing a chapter that's going to get cut anyways. It's not fun. And so I think it's really important to look at the big scale things, get that sorted out. And then when you go back through, you can do the smaller line edit kind of things and polish it up. So that's pretty much my approach. But I definitely go chapter by chapter when I'm doing revisions. I try to do it often. That's the thing. Like, I think that there's a whole idea that you have to write every day or you have to revise every day. And I'm going to personally say that I don't. And I think it's really important to recognize that people have different lifestyles and different situations in their lives that can prevent them from writing every day for whatever reason it may be. And so, as long as you have a consistent schedule of some sort, then you'll stay on target and you'll be able to work on your revisions and get them done, because Jess is exactly right. You do have deadlines for things. You always will. And so I think it's really important to understand your own process, understand what you can handle on your own to avoid burnout, because that's the last thing anybody needs. Because at the end of the day, and Jess and I have talked about this several times, that writing and revising, your art is something you love to do. It should be for enjoyment. And anytime you get to a place where you're not enjoying it, I think it's important to take a step back and make adjustments so you can find your love for writing again, because you have to enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you said it perfectly because you said large scale to small scale. That's kind of what I meant with mine. Like I look at plot. That's kind of my large scale that I always look at. And then I go through editing, sensory imagery and internal monologue and things like that. So you said it perfectly with that in mind. So we do have a similar process, which is interesting, because Demi has written a handful of books, so a lot more than I have, but it's kind of cool to see that our process is similar. And I love your point about having a schedule, kind of like how I said too, because if your schedule is your schedule. Demi's right. It's your art, but you also have to treat it like it's your job. One of the hardest things that I learned in the program is that writing is a business. That's I hate saying it, but it's true. Writing is a business. Yeah. And so you are contributing to that business with your book, whether you like the fact that it's a business or not. That's how it is. So you're contributing to that business with your book. And if you don't take that seriously, then you're not going to be able to get published. For example, I'm going to give a shout out to Demi here. She graduated the program and she started querying right away. She's like, I have stuff that I want published. So you have to still be determined too. And the other thing too, if you want to think about it this way, is revision is like a little puzzle, think of it as a fun little puzzle.
Yeah.
You have to solve this, when you're writing your book, the first draft, you're like, okay, this is just going to happen. We're going to have fun here. And then revision is like a little puzzle. You're fixing the pieces of the puzzle. I've listened to a lot of authors, interviews, and some of them will say I just pants the first draft and really enjoy revision, like I was saying before. Or people who are plotters like Demi. Yes, you have a little bit less to revise, I think, in some instances because your plot is solid. But at the same time, it's for everybody. The puzzle is there for everybody. And I will give you my biggest life hack to revision is sleeping, swimming, and taking a shower. That sounds so freaking strange. It does, but it's true because Literally, my best ideas come from when I'm half conscious. Like, Demi will tell you, I'll text her at like 2 in the morning and she'll wake up the next day. She'll wake up the next day and be like, "What did you send me?" I'm like, "This is like my revision idea." And she'll listen to it and she'll say either this is crap or this is great. Like, so my best ideas come from when I'm half conscious. And like I feel like too, when you're submerged in water, it's like a sensory deprivation tank. Like, think of Stranger Things. Like, it reminds me of that. And so like when you're in that, you're like, for me, I'm alone with my thoughts. So my thoughts will lead me to like a vast wonderland of weirdness that may or may not help me with my book. But like that's kind of where you are, because you're forced to be alone with your thoughts. And if you
Yeah.
force yourself to think about writing, like good things will happen. I always tell people to have either pen and paper or phone near them when they're like revising or when they're thinking of things. Like, I'll get out of the pool and I'll record a voice memo. Like, that's kind of how I work. So it may not be for you, but like if you're stuck, try it.
Yeah.
Like, if you get up and move, your brain is gonna move too.
I love it. Oh my gosh. So many great things. And yeah, you bring up the great point that what it all comes down to is finding what works for you. And so I think it's really great to try different things. If you haven't done a reverse outline before, try it. If you haven't tried going chapter by chapter before, try it and see what works for you. And if you find a completely different thing that works for you, that's fantastic. We're all individuals and we're all finding our own way. And just to wrap up our revision chat here is I love what Jess said about approaching it as a business. That is why revision is so important, because when you're going, especially like with traditional publishing, there are word count expectations, there are genre expectations, there's a certain standard of the prose that agents are looking for. And so when you draft, you could have the best idea ever thought of ever. But if you don't revise your book to get it to industry standard, you may not get the chance to get that published. So I think revision is a really, really great step of the process and a vital one to get your book to industry standards. And also, there's no set number of the number of revisions you have to do, whatever works for your book. After you get feedback and consistently get feedback, keep making changes until basically all the comments you're getting are personal preference kind of things. When you feel your book is ready to go and you're just tweaking adjectives, that's when you know you're done. I would sit there on like thesource.com, like looking at words, and I was like, okay, Jimmy, you're done. Stop.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing too is that, like, if you didn't revise, for example, and you started querying right away and you got all these rejections, a lot of the time you would sit there and go, "Man, like, I must suck as a writer. Like, I'm getting nowhere." No, you don't suck. Maybe you just have to look through it again. For me, it's kind of fun because think about it this way, like, a lot of your work is done if you think about it. So, like, you already made your characters. You already have, like, maybe your plot is like 90% solid. So you already have all of that. So all you have to do is like fix it to make it perfect. And that's kind of fun. I mean, for a perfectionist, it is very fun because we are sitting there like staring at it and being like, this needs to be done, this needs to be done. And so that part's kind of fun. So, like, a lot of your work is done before you revise because you have like all the creative stuff that you need to make a book. And for me, sometimes coming up with ideas for a novel is the hardest part.
Yeah.
I don't know if you struggle with that too, but like
Yeah.
coming with an idea for me takes way longer than like revising a chapter.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Perfect. Well, yeah, I think the last point I'll make here is that revision is truly magical because it's so satisfying seeing something you created become something incredible. And so that's the mindset. If you're an author who is a little hesitant with revision, just have the mindset of when this is revised, it's going to sparkle and it's going to be incredible. And it's going to be so great to look at that and say, all the hard work I put into this story got me here. And now you have an incredible book. So that is our chat on revision. But now we've made it to the plot twist. Uh-oh. As authors and readers, we love plot twists in books. So we have made it to the plot twist where I'm going to ask you a fun question that's going to be bookish related. And the goal is for you to have like a lightning fast answer. So super fun. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
So I know that you are a big fan of Fourth Wing. Am I right?
Yes, shamelessly so. I'm literally a walking advertisement. It's so sad.
Oh my goodness. So your question is, if you were part of the universe, which quadrant would you want to belong to?
I'd love to be a writer, but I know that I literally am not like athletically inclined. So like I would, as much as I'd love to be a writer, I'm like I've always gotten like a 4.0 GPA, like so I know I'd be a really good scribe. But secretly I want to be a writer. Like if I could change myself in a fantasy world and make myself kind of badass, then I would be a writer. But if you're talking about just me in the real world, what I would fit into would probably be a scribe.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, Jess, thank you so much for joining me for this incredible conversation. Can you please share with everybody listening where they can connect with you online?
Sure. So you guys can follow me on Instagram at Jessica_Minneci. So all lowercase, JESSICA _ M as in Mary, INNECI on Instagram. I'm going to be posting more book reviews on that account. So trying to kind of beef it up and meet people. And, if you're struggling to revise, meet people and network so that you can get some more feedback. And if you want me to read your book or talk about revision, I would love to. I love to meet other writers. So please feel free to follow me.
Awesome. Well, Jess, thank you so much for joining me. And that is a wrap. So, listeners, thank you so much for tuning into this chapter of Literary Blend with Jess, all about revision. If you enjoyed our conversation, please consider leaving Literary Blend a review and giving it 5 stars to help more listeners just like you discover the show. Also, if you have author friends or others in the publishing industry who may be interested in the show and the conversations on it, please pass it along to them as well. Thank you again for listening, and until we flip to the next chapter, happy reading and writing.